Welcome home. This is Tampa Home Talk, and this is your podcast radio show for all things real estate in the Tampa Bay market. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell, and joining me for the show is my favorite lender extraordinaire, Miss Sarah Crickey. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So glad you're here. What do you think? You like the new studio?
It's very cozy. I love it.
Good.
Yeah.
Studio Launch Party this Friday, June 13th from 4 to 7 p.m., 2025, in case you're listening on a different year, because all these go to the archive. And we'll be having it here at the Tampa Home Talk studio. And you can just Google Tampa Home Talk and it will show you right where we are. But that address is 23526 State Road 54 in Lutz. If you're familiar with the area, we're right on 54 next to Livingston. Just look for the Chase Bank and we almost touch them. But just search Tampa Home Talk. It'll show you our location and bring you right to the front door. Public is invited. We'd love it for you guys to come. If you've ever thought about doing radio or a podcast or you want to be involved with the show, come check us out 4 to 7. Sarah will be kicking off her birthday weekend, so she will not be here. So we're giving her an advanced sneak peek here of the studio. So yeah, we're trying, it's new, you know? So if you guys have watched the show and you've seen some of the behind the scenes we're getting ready, we apologize for that. We're working through it, and I promise we'll get it nailed. We'll get it perfect. We're working through the details now. So as always, our shows go to a podcast, so you can just go to Tampa Home Talk, where you've always been able to listen to the show later and pick it up there. If you're listening to the show on the air, because we are now sending it to the station, and we get cut off because we can go a little longer if we want to on a podcast, you can catch the show, every show in its entirety, on Tampa Home Talk. Just go to tampahometalk.com under radio and you can pick up the shows there, or any of your favorite podcast players. You can listen to Tampa Home Talk there too. And our off-air number where you can call or text us anytime you like is 813-377-2775. Again, you can call or text us. If you have an idea for the show, you want to give us some feedback, you think you're going to be the perfect guest, you know the perfect guest, you want us to feature a topic. If you want to know more about something, we will go find the expert and deliver that information to you. So just call or text 813-377-2775. Say hello. Let us know at least your first name and give us a great idea for a show. We'd be happy to go find the expert contributors for that topic, and we will make a show out of it. Sounds like fun, right, Sarah?
Absolutely.
We've talked about this. As a matter of fact, I think, and we get a lot of ideas for the show around the day-to-day stuff that we see. Mm-hmm. And I know we have other stuff kind of lined up for this hour, but when you think about, remember we had one, you'll tell the story way better than me, but we were looking for a compensating factor, and one of them was an energy audit. Remember? Well, you tell the story better than me. What was it? And I'm like, Sarah, that's a great idea for a show. We need to do that.
So we just really kind of got lucky in this particular scenario on this property. We had a buyer that was using a USDA program, which is a zero down program.
One of the best programs on the planet as well.
Fabulous program, but it has rules that are very different from FHA and conventional type loans. In this program, the allowable debt ratio, which is what lenders use to qualify a buyer, is a little lower than what you would get in a conventional or an FHA loan. And when you exceed it, then you have to give USDA what they call a compensating factor.
Basically a reason to write the loan or take it.
Right. And so they don't give you 12.
That's how we used to do mortgages back in the day, Sarah.
You are correct. But they don't give you a list of 12 logical things to choose from. Well, they're logical, but they don't give you a long list to choose from. They give you maybe 4 compensating factors to choose from, and you have to make sure your borrower can fit in that box.
Do you know what those are offhand?
So,
just curious if you remember.
One of them.
I know it's a guide thing you probably look up, but
I can probably recite 3 of them right now without referring back to that guideline. But one of them is, have you been on your job for a full 2 years? Another is, do you have 3 mortgage payments in savings that you're not spending to close, so that you're closing without $0 left?
Yeah, so after you spent all your money, if your payment's $2,000, you have $6,000 left over.
Correct. So reserves, 2-year job history in the same, not in the same occupation, with the same employer.
Which that's a big thing, I guess, this day and age. 2 years is a long time, same job.
Is a compensating factor. An energy audit. on the home is a compensating factor. And I can't remember the fourth off the top of my head. But in this particular scenario of this buyer, she didn't meet the 2-year requirement. She had literally just changed jobs the year before in the same line of work, but with a new company. They didn't meet the reserve requirement. The reason they were using USDA was to get that wonderful 0 down payment.
With no MI?
With no
very
mortgage.
Small guarantee fee?
Correct, yeah. And so I started staring at, well, what else can I use as a compensating factor?
Because they were a little over in the debt ratio, is that right?
Because they were just a little too high, still within the criteria, but too high for an approval without a compensating factor.
Okay.
So I'm looking at this list and I'm like, an energy audit. Okay. When was this house built? It's pretty new. It's only a couple years old. Sure, when it was built new, that it would have had to have passed some sort of energy audit within the county in order to be completed. Mm-hmm. And so I went on a little bit of a wild goose chase. Home inspectors don't do them. You have to. You're basically certified in that field to do an energy audit. And fast forward, we tracked down an energy auditor that looked at all of the county permitting that we were able to pull online and was able to certify the house met current energy efficient standards.
Based on the permits?
Based on all of the permitting was extensive. There were probably 30 plus pages because this was a builder. This was a new build. It wasn't like somebody that just replaced their roof,
right.
You know. So there was extensive documentation on the permitting process that gave that auditor basically everything that they needed.
So he didn't have to come inspect the home. He was able to do it based on the permit records?
He was able to do it based on the permit.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
And he put together a pretty comprehensive report based on what EPA considers energy efficient and things like that versus what this builder actually did. So it worked out.
I talk about this all the time in any line of work, right? But certainly ours as well. But in any line of work, and I think it's a John Maxwell thing. Right. I think. If I'm misquoting that, I apologize in advance. You're welcome to correct me online. But 10,000 hours of anything, you gain mastery. Mm-hmm. So if you have 10,000 hours doing any one thing, right? Writing mortgages, doing real estate, you'll have mastery of that subject. Right. So anything. And it takes a while to get to 10,000 hours, if you can imagine. You think about a 40-hour work week.
Well, you think about 10,000 hours, and in 10,000 hours plus that I've been doing this.
Right. Way more than plus.
I've never gotten an energy efficient report on a home. And thankfully, this wasn't a 1952 house. And it just, all the stars lined up and came together for the client. But yeah.
But so here's the thing. Like, my point is, when you look to hire somebody like a real estate pro or a mortgage person, prime example, I cannot even tell you. Right. I'll share a story on that, which is pretty perfect. That just happened like a week ago. But when you hire your professional, you know, there's a lot of people that have a real estate license. Mm-hmm. They're not all the same.
No.
You know that. Right. And the other thing too is the 80-20 principle. So Pareto's principle says that, you know, 20%. So it went back to the farmland days in Italy, or the property, and it was where 20% of the people owned 80% of the property. That's where it came from. Right. But that's true in anything. So if you look at even doctors in any field, could be a general practitioner, could be a specialist. 20% of the people in that field are rock stars. Right. They're gonna know things. They're gonna have mastery, right, mm-hmm. of that. They're gonna be rock stars. The other 80% are gonna be mediocre at best. Right. And that could be somebody that's gonna be amazing, but they're probably still learning, right? Like our first year in the business, we didn't know anything like what we know now. Right. You learn a lot with all those little things. So the more experience, the more knowledge, the more hours, the more years, like actually with not just how long you've been licensed, but like the number of transactions you've done really makes a difference, because you can avoid all of those headaches that cost you time and money later by not having that experience. Right. So the 20% of agents are going to be the rock stars. They're the one closing 80% of the business. I would say the same thing is true in your field. Right. You're often like top in production for loan officers all over the country. You've made the top 5. I know you have.
So my borrowers that have unique situations don't have to worry that I'm learning from their loan.
Right. But that's the truth.
Right.
That's how it happens.
Right.
So I'll share a story real quick to pivot back to what I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
And this is why I say all lenders are not created equally.
Right.
And you know me, I have a strong personality. And when it comes time to negotiate for my client,
Right.
you don't want to be on the other side of that. You don't. Like,
Right.
you're going to want to be my client. You're not going to want to be the person on the other side.
Right.
And I get along well with my peers. It's not that. I get along very well with my peers. And I'll tell you how that played out in this particular story too, because the buyer's agent on my listing is an agent that's been around for a while. We've had a deal together. She's great to work with. And so in this particular situation, we had multiple offers, which we're not seeing a lot of in today's market. And we're going to talk about the state of the market and some dynamics and all of that sort of stuff. But the thing about it is we put a provision in the contract because we had multiple offers that the buyer would have their appraisal within 14 days on the contract. And you know as well as I do, Sarah, they could get that appraisal down to the wire right before closing, right? I mean, depends on how on the ball that lender is and when they're ordering it and all this stuff.
Right.
So we're about 2 weeks into the contract, right?
Okay.
And my team alerts me, hey, we haven't heard anything back on this appraisal yet.
Right.
And the lender is asking for an extension on the appraisal and also closing. Well, in my mind, because I used to be a lender and I've sold a lot of real estate, I'm going red flag, something's going on. We're not just going to blindly say yes to an extension, which is what most people do.
Right.
And so I start digging into that and I call Adelisa and I say, get the lender on the phone. I want to talk to him.
Right.
So she gets the lender on the phone. I talk to him and I said, what's the situation here? What's going on? Do you have the appraisal in hand? Mm-hmm. Is it satisfactory to your underwriter? And he's like, no. I said, have you ordered the appraisal? Because I haven't gotten alert that anyone's asked for access to do the appraisal to the home. He's like, no. And I said, well, why isn't the appraisal done? The deadline's today.
Right.
And he said, well, and so then he knows like I'm going to dig in. So he gives me the backstory and tells me how the person relocated here and they weren't yet on a W-2. They were paid cash. Mm-hmm. You know what a tailspin that can create.
Right.
So I guess they got that fixed. He's now on a W-2. He's on the regular payroll and essentially got it fixed, but this guy's a broker. He's not a direct lender. Nothing's wrong with brokers, but it's a little different, right? That world. Right. If you're not on it or have a relationship with them, it's probably not going to work out like you think and stuff's going to take longer.
Right.
And so that's exactly what happened. He was waiting on the underwriter to actually look at the file and approve it the next week, but the deadline was on Friday of the week before. And it was like a Tuesday they were supposed to look at it. So it gives them this whole song and dance about how their turn times are longer, yada, 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 all this stuff. They didn't order it yet because they don't order it until it's approved by underwriting and that's done. And I said, well, who made that decision? That's what I told him.
So was the cash and the W-2, was that kind of discussed in the pre-qualification?
Probably, I'm guessing not.
Got it.
So it goes back to like all your lenders are not created equal, right? So I'm just saying like this was what happened. And so when I get a deal like that on the other side, and I'll finish the story in a minute, I was like, I always know when Sarah's not working on the deal, we have to micromanage this stuff and like, and I don't want to micromanage it, but a lot of agents do because the lenders don't do their job, right? I don't have to micromanage it. Right. If there's a problem or we're going to go south or there's going to be a delay, you're letting me know early and we're putting our heads together and figuring out a solution. Usually you've already figured it out before you call me. Rarely do I have to get involved. But because I have that lender background, sometimes you'll call me, you'll go, all right, here's the dealio. I got this. What do you think? What's the solution? Usually, and we'll figure it out.
Usually I do figure it out, but there's a few times every year where I will just say, I kind of need your brain for a minute. We're going to need to hash this out. And I'll call and tell you.
And it helps, right?
Yeah.
But it's that collaborative work environment, I think, that helps too. So back to the story, the lender basically said that he made the decision to hold off on that appraisal. And I said, well, my team's been asking you about it. Mm-hmm. We've been asking you who the appraiser is so that we can let them in for access by the deadline. And when I asked him basically who made it, and then he was like, oh yeah, we're not going to spend the buyer's money on an appraisal until we're done. And I said, well, you know what? I said, I think we got a problem here and you should have discussed this with the buyer's agent because you made a decision for that buyer that they're against what they're contractually obligated to do under the agreement. And so I think a lot of lenders don't look at it from that perspective. perspective, like this is a binding contract. You can create a lot of havoc for your buyer.
Right.
And so I called the buyer's agent right away and I said, here's a dealio. Here's a conversation I just had with the lender. Is this a regular lender you work with? She said, no. It's somebody who was like a family friend. They did a deal. And I said, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
And I said, well, here's what happened. Here's what's going on. I said, they basically asked me for an extension on the appraisal and on closing. And of course, I start diving in why to find out, because I've got that lender background, and I find out that he intentionally withheld he didn't order the appraisal.
Right.
And so I said, I think, and she's like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? I said, I want you to get on the phone with your buyer and have a conversation with them about that, how this lender is making different decisions for them that they've already agreed to contractually. They've made that decision for them, and now they're in breach of contract, or they will be after today. So I need you to talk to them and explain that to them and make sure that they understand what's going on here, and let them make the decision on what they want to do, because they're going to be out of contract as of today. They'll be in breach. And so sure enough, she calls the buyer. They're like, no, we were in a multiple offer situation. The buyer loves it. The seller's made some repairs, already, so that we could pass an FHA inspection. And now there's a few more things that got tagged on the appraisal afterward that we're also having to fix. But, I got to call my seller and tell my seller, hey, they want an extension. If I'm a seller, I'm asking a lot of questions on that, right? So essentially, in a nutshell, I had to explain to the buyer's agent how that works. She goes, well, what do we do? How do we know if he's doing it? I said, look, the way this works is there's an AMC involved. They're going to put that order in, and an appraiser is going to pick up that order. It's a round table. Someone will grab it and they'll take that order. I said, it's no different than an agent getting a alert, right? That someone's generated a lead and they want an agent to pick it up and call a client. Same thing. The appraiser is getting a new order, which is a new client. I said, so someone's going to pick that up right away. You're not going to have to wait. Someone's going to grab it. So that lender ordered it on a rush. Someone picked it up that day and was trying to schedule it for Monday. And this was a Friday. But all of that, like if I had been a jerk on the other side, right? Or like the agent that doesn't work well with other agents, you need to have a good relationship with your co-op agent. And they were trying to understand, look, I'm trying to protect all parties, including my seller. And we need to be fair about this. And this is what the buyer already agreed to. So now I'm going to explain to the seller what happened and tell them why they should sign an extension, right? It's a whole different place than here, just sign this extension to close and on the appraisal. So that's what I mean by like all agents are not created equal. And we're looking at all of these offers, and at the time we're negotiating, trying to decide which one we want to go with. That may have been a deal breaker on one of the offers. We might have said, well, if you don't want to put a 2-week appraisal contingency in there, then we're just going to go to another offer. Because if there's a problem, you want to know sooner rather than later. You want to know. I want to know. The sellers want to know. And you can get an appraisal in 2 weeks. That's not a problem.
No,
that's not a problem.
Less than 2 weeks. Did that buyer close? Were they able to
Not yet. We're under contract. Good. I think they were supposed to close next week, but they're a couple of weeks out.
Okay.
But in a nutshell, we've already got the appraisal. The appraiser is picking on a couple more things, and we have to have time to go out there and get that situation fixed.
Okay.
So that's where we are on it, and that's what we did.
Got it.
So so we see just kooky stuff like that, where if you're the lender on the deal, I don't even have to tell you. You're going to see it on the contract. You're going to know what the deadlines are. You're going to know what's expected from the borrower buyer. And you're going to make sure that we meet all those contractual deadlines, because they are just that. And you put the buyer's escrow and everything else in jeopardy when you don't follow that contract. How many people do we see during the heyday in the last 2 or 3 years that flat out lost their money, lost everything? I mean, the people that bought my house, remember that? They ultimately bought my house that I sold, my family home I was in for over 20 years. They literally had a seller that backed out of the deal because they couldn't get the house that they wanted. Because they missed a deadline. And it was agent owned, and the seller said, nope, we're just going to sell it to somebody else for more money.
No, and communication is really important. It doesn't take that long to get an appraisal. I was talking with someone on your team last night about a home inspection where there are substantial issues with big ticket items. And so my very first question was, are we going to proceed with the appraisal, or do you need time to negotiate that?
Which makes sense, but there was a deadline. You were talking about that earlier.
A deadline. Correct. Yeah. So at that point, but it's just the dialogue back and forth to problem solve, and you should be doing that up front, not not leaving people on a need-to-know basis, trying to figure it out in your own mind, you know?
And a good lender wants to protect you from spending that money on an appraisal if you're not past all the issues in the inspection.
Right.
But at the same time, if there was a deadline on there, you would move that along.
Figure out problems, Well, which I would be doing dealing with that sort of a problem at the pre-qualification stage. But
right.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So that's a couple of things in terms of the state of the market. So the market, let me just give you a real estate perspective because we haven't done this on a lot of them. And I know we're streaming live and I normally go over the stats. I'll tell you the market's very different from one neighborhood to the next. Danielle and I talked about this a week or two ago where we will go in. I see weird stuff. Like we'll go in and pull the comps for a listing and I'll see all these actives or maybe one pending or zero pending. There's nothing pending, but there's all these active properties for sale and there's a handful of solds. So number one, that data right there tells a story. If there's a bunch of active and no pending or one pending and then less amount of solds, that tells us our absorption rate's moving up quickly. And some people are panicked by that. I'm not. I think the market is settling down. That's all. It's a normal slowdown. It's not come to a screeching halt, right? Like 2008, we're not seeing any of that.
Nope.
We are seeing where it's slowing down. We're at the tail end of a seller's market and or in a balanced market now in that particular community. Overall, Tampa Bay as a whole, we're still in a seller's market. And you wouldn't believe that, right? Because people say the sky is falling, but we are like a 0 to 6 month absorption rate. You are in a seller's market. Now, what we're seeing a lot of is like 4.5 months, 5 months supply of homes, which means we're getting close. That pendulum is swinging towards a balanced market, which is a totally normal market. It's every home has a marketing time. It's going to take a certain amount of time to sell that home. And, you know, you're going to have to be priced correctly. You can't overshoot like you did 2 years ago. You got to be priced correct or you're going to be a sitting duck, not selling. And you're going to be wondering why a buyer that actually went pending on a home that might have picked yours chose a different one because you were priced too high. So you can't miss that market. You got to have an agent that sold properties in a market like this one that understands how to read the data and the market and all the information. So, I mean, if you're a seller or you know someone that's been sitting on the market and they can't figure out why the home is not selling and they're not getting regular weekly updates and reports from their agent telling them how the listing's performing, give us a call. Call us or text us. We can dive into that and help you figure it out. 813-377-2775. That's our off-air number, 813-377-2775. We'll help you figure that out. So, and you're seeing a little bit of a slowdown too, right? Stuff on the market a little longer before you get a contract. Buyers are more picky. They're taking their time.
So I'm seeing some price cuts. And it's across the board and it's not in any one specific area. I'm seeing properties hit the market and you know, test the water for a couple, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then do a price cut. I'm seeing that often. I'm seeing buyers ask for closing cost contributions and sellers are willing to pay for it.
And they can get it in this market.
They can get it in this market. Not on every home. You know, maybe a house hits the market and it's only been live for 4 days. The seller isn't really ready to pay buyer closing costs. They kind of want to see what kind of offers they get in. But, you know, I am seeing sellers pay buyers closing costs. So
if you get an offer in this market and you're a seller and you've been on the market for 2 weeks, like what you just explained, and the buyer is asking for closing costs, experience shows your first offer is your best offer. If it looks reasonable and they're asking for closing costs, take it or negotiate quickly to get whatever the buyer needs. Because chances are your next offer you're going to get is lower. We are in a shifting market. We are moving towards a balanced market, which is going to be less favorable for sellers. And so don't dismiss that as a seller, especially if you need to sell your home, don't dismiss it. I realize there's a certain threshold where sellers will not sell their property and they'd rather keep it. And that's because the home is worth that price to you. It's not worth that to a buyer. I'm a prime example. I've got my home on the market right now. It's listed for $550,000. I got an offer that came in for $525,000 with a VA buyer asking for like $16,000 in closing costs. And I went back to them and I said, Okay, if you need closing costs, I'll give it to you, but you need to roll it into the price.
Right.
Or I'll do $525 and you pay your own closing cost.
Right.
And the buyer said no. They walked away and we're still on the market. And
Wow.
so, but here's the thing, and this is what I want to explain for some people that have to sell.
Right.
That is important. You're going to have to jump on that. You might have to take that offer, even though you don't want to, even though you might be losing money.
Right.
You might have to take that offer. For me, I understand what's going on in and around the community, and I don't have to sell. I can rent it.
Right.
I didn't want to rent it. I wanted to sell it. But for that price, would I rather rent it? And the answer is yes. So for me, my house is worth $550 or $525.
Right.
Where to a prospective buyer, that particular buyer that I had that could have pulled the trigger, that's a net offer of what, $510? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I'm paying $15,000 in closing costs, it's a net offer of $510.
Right.
So I had to make that decision in that moment. Do I want to take it or do I want to wait and
a lot of
possibly
sellers
rent it?
aren't in that position.
They can't do it. Yeah.
They can't do it.
And this is where your agent guiding you through the process and understanding what your situation is, they're going to guide you appropriately. Right. For like my house is empty. I'm paying staging.
There's that fear of maybe I'm leaving money on the table. Fast forward, your house is still on the market 60 days later. Now you're doing a price cut, and there's your money on the table.
Well, and your holding costs.
Right.
You have a mortgage you're paying.
Yeah.
You have utilities you're paying. Yep. In my case, lawn service, pool service. That's all money you're paying. So you have to add that up.
Right.
That's your holding cost.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even count anything that would break. Yeah. If you get a plumbing leak, if you get whatever, something that happens, your holding costs are now effectively more money than if you just took that offer.
Right.
So you have to consider all those things.
Right.
And that's a thing that experience brings that, you're not going to get if you're a new agent or if you just started selling in the last several years. We've been in an extreme seller's market for a long time. Yeah. So I read a stat that said, I think it was 94% of every agent still selling properties right now in this market have never experienced a balanced market.
Yeah.
Let alone a buyer's market, which you and I work through that pain. That's hard. That's hard. This is my fourth downturn for as long as I've been an agent or a licensed broker, as you know, as a mortgage pro before I started doing real estate. But this is the fourth downturn I've seen in my career. Yeah. And this is easy. Like I'm looking at this going, this is a walk in the park. This is normal cyclical real estate change. Right. Nothing major here.
So when I'm pre-qualifying a buyer, we talk about it. So we're going to use Hometown Heroes, which we will talk about. We're going to get some down payment assistance. If the stars line up and all the numbers look beautiful for you, you would want to ask the seller for 2 or 3%, as a contribution. But let's plan on a plan B. What if the seller's agreeable to give you a little contribution, but they don't want to go the whole 2 or 3%? So we talk about ideas behind the scenes at the pre-qualification stage. Can you get a gift? Can you save up a paycheck or two to cover that gap? Like, what can you do to make that happen? If the seller says no, we always tell the buyers, ask for everything you can get. Yeah. But let's talk about a plan in case there's some negotiation there, so that you can still buy the home that you like,
This is where the consultation, and that's theoretically what you're doing, is a consultation with them as a borrower.
Right.
We're doing a consultation with them as a buyer, an in-depth consultation on what they're looking for, their lifestyle. They're a little bit different, those things. Yeah. And with my background, I kind of naturally dive into some of that stuff and numbers. I can't help it. I just do. Right. But you're problem solving before there's a problem. Right. You're already fixing stuff so that it can be as smooth as possible.
About what ifs. Yeah.
And if you can keep them or get it ahead, and there's multiple times I've seen it and I've said, hey, you need to start saving some cash. You don't have enough money. Yeah. Here's the bare minimum you need, even if you're buying on a zero down, to get to the finish line, because you have inspections, you have appraisal, you have escrow deposit. You're going to have some of those things. So we're coaching them and talking through those things, and it's helpful. So, and the good thing about this market is there's a lot of amazing programs out there. Yeah. A lot of down payment assistance available, which we're going to talk about a lot of that today. Some really good down payment assistance programs that have been replenished with funds, which are amazing. We're happy to see those back because they're really, really good. You want to chat through some of those, or where do you want to start on that?
So I actually printed and brought some stats. Our favorite down payment assistance program that's administered through Florida Housing is called Hometown Heroes.
It's a stellar one. Talk about why that one's better.
So it's just great. I'll give you a little backstory on it. Okay, so it was first introduced back in June of 22. it was funded with $100 million. Okay, so when that program came out, it had what's called an occupation list. And it wasn't a really strict occupation list. It wasn't just for law enforcement or people in the medical field.
Police, firefighters,
you could work for a child care facility or for a veterinarian, and your job could potentially be on that list. So they came out with an occupation list. They funded it for a year with $100 million. At the end of that year,
which went quick.
Well, actually, in that first year with that occupation list, the funds lasted almost for a full 12 months.
Because it was stricter.
Yeah, and then it was depleted. They brought it back, fast forward in July of 23, with the same $100 million, and they took away the occupation list. You just had to be working full-time being at least 35 hours a week. The money was gone quick at that point because basically, anybody
that was a first-time home buyer that hasn't owned in 3 years was eligible.
So the money came out July 1st and was fully depleted August 22nd. Like $100 million. Okay,
that's quick.
So they infused a little more funds into that program in 23. In November of 23, they infused $36 million into that program. On the 6th of November, it was fully depleted. December 22nd, and then it was gone.
So I want to talk about that for a minute because there's a thing called the Sadowski Fund here in the state of Florida, and it's where a portion of your closing costs, I forget which tax stamp it is, but I forget if it's intangibles or I think it's tax stamps on the mortgage. There's a huge portion of that goes to the Sadowski Fund, which is meant for down payment assistance programs, affordable housing, helping the elderly with repairs they can't afford. So that Sadowski Fund was meant to do those things. And a lot of the state legislators would sweep that money and use it for other things. And DeSantis took a hard, firm stance that we're going to do this. Our people need it. People are hit hard by COVID. The rates are higher. And so they use that money for its intended purpose. So I was happy to see that.
Right. So with Florida Housing doesn't just administer the Hometown Heroes program. It has multiple other different forms of down payment assistance that typically never run out of funds. Okay. And I can talk about the nuances of how those programs work, but suffice to say, when they are paid back, some are forgivable, but some are not. Some are paid back. When they are paid back, that money goes right back in the pot.
Which it should.
To go to more first-time home
it
buyers.
should. Homes appreciate over time, right? Significantly. Right. And if someone or something or some program gave you that money to help you get into your first home, which is hard to save for your first down payment on a home. I know I worked 3 jobs to do it without any down payment assistance.
Right.
That gift should be reciprocated to someone else that needs it in the future.
Right. And I'm going to break down a little bit how that kind of works. But so back to 24, another $100 million was given in July 1st of 24, and it was totally committed by the 20th of August, 2024. There have been a little fallout funds. And when I say fallout funds, I mean people who reserve money, lenders that reserve money for their borrower. And maybe their borrower's loan doesn't get approved. Or maybe there's property condition issues and the loan doesn't close. So those funds are then re-released so someone else can use them. We call it kind of fallout money. So there have been a few rounds of that fallout money. But here's a big number, okay? So that $100 million that was infused into Hometown Heroes in 2024, that facilitated a total sales well, first of all, it facilitated 6,181 transactions.
So that's 6,000 people that probably would not have purchased.
So here's a bigger number. The total sales price on all of those properties, $2,022,763,000, $763 and $919. So over $2 billion worth of real estate transactions. I said that wrong, but
which our market may be in a totally different place if we didn't have those. I believe that.
Right. The average sales price across the board on those loans, $342,261. So imagine, I mean, that's a big number in terms of real estate. It's a really great program that helped a lot of homeowners get into homes, and we're about to have it back July 1st of this year.
Yep, which we can already start using, right? We can already
we can't
get under contract and reserve it or not yet?
Yeah, okay. We can't use it yet. The funds are being appropriated right now. We expect to see some feedback on that sometime, I want to say, second to third week in June for the kickoff July 1st. So we can't see an interest rate. We can't reserve funds. They're going to be revamping part of the guidelines. We haven't seen.
You don't know what it is
We
yet?
haven't seen what they're changing yet. Okay.
Any idea or speculation on that? Not
No
yet?
speculation. Nope. But here's what we are doing. We are underwriting loans now that are going on contract to close after the 1st. And we're underwriting them to last year's guidelines. So as soon as those guidelines are made available, and my company, the mortgage firm, was the largest lender for Hometown Heroes last year. So we definitely have, kind of some inside tracks with Florida Housing, and we get notified in advance of things happening. Haven't seen the guideline yet, but when we do, we'll be going behind it right away. So we're working on files now going in contract to use the Hometown Heroes money, fully approving those loans with the assumption that July 1st, as soon as those funds are available, we're going to go and reserve it for the borrower. We'll have already cleared the loan. We're going to go behind any nuances with regards to underwriting guideline changes, and then we're going to clear and close that loan.
So, Sarah, a couple things about this one, which is why it's our favorite, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these points. Not only is it down payment assistance, but isn't the rate better? The mortgage insurance is less. Is that right?
It's going to vary between the program that you're using. So the program's fabulous because it'll give you up to 5% of your loan amount. Okay, so when you're in a $300,000 price point, for example, you're talking 16. I don't have a calculator, but
which is your first-time home buyer price range.
So if you're using Hometown Heroes in conjunction with an FHA loan, your mortgage insurance is going to be what it is. It's a fixed factor for FHA, and they charge everybody the same thing in the whole country. Okay?
I thought the rates were preset on those. No?
If you're I'll explain that a little better.
Okay.
If you're using a conventional product, and you meet the what are called AMI, area median income requirements, you could get a break on the mortgage insurance and the payment because we can use a special feature with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that will give you a break on that mortgage insurance. There are income limits that apply. The income limits that apply to conventional loans for Home Ready and Home Possible are lower than the income limits that apply in the Hometown Heroes loan. So just to kind of get, because now I'm kind of sidetracked, the Hometown Heroes program now is a great program in the sense that there is no occupation list. You must be working for a Florida-based employer, like brick and mortar in the state. If I work for Amazon or if I work for Humana and I'm a remote worker.
Let me tell you, those guys are the Hometown Heroes, the Amazon delivery drivers.
Right. Well, and that's just an example. Because you can work for a company that has a presence in Florida, but if your pay stub is attached to a company in Wisconsin, then it doesn't qualify. So you've got to be working for a Florida-based employer. The 35 or 40 hour or what's construed as full-time, that is no more. Your employer simply needs to verify that you are a full-time employee. Maybe you work 34, but that's their version of full-time. As long as they verify you're full-time, you're good.
Okay.
So Florida-based employer, full-time, veterans are exempt from that rule. You have to be a first-time home buyer. So a first-time home buyer doesn't mean that I couldn't have owned a house in another life. I just can't have owned a primary residence in the last 3 years.
And that's a big myth.
Yep.
People think if you've ever owned a home, you're no longer a first-time home buyer.
Listen, I could have inherited a property from my family, and this has happened in the past. I never lived in it, but it was passed down to me, maybe from mom or dad. And that's okay. You just can't have owned your primary for the prior 3 years, okay? So a lot of people don't understand that as well. There are scenarios where people get divorced, okay? So maybe it's a husband and wife, and they've both owned their primary. Now they're parting ways, and the wife says, I'm going to move out. I'm going to buy my own primary. Well, technically, she's owned a primary. In a divorce situation, an exception can be made. So there are nuances to that rule. There are workarounds to that rule, but it's 5% of the loan amount. Work for a Florida-based employer on a full-time basis. Okay, we're anticipating $100 million. There's a rumor mill that it could be a little more. So we're just positioning our buyers to qualify for it as soon as possible. With respect to rates, it's the Florida Housing sets the rate for all of their down payment assistance programs every day. So it's kind of in line with the retail market. You know, if I were, and you just need a 640 credit score to get into this program, by the way.
Which is kind of low.
It's low. So in that scenario, let's say that I have a 640 credit score and I want an FHA loan. A government rate's going to be a little better than a conventional rate, but even on a 640 credit score, my rate's going to be a little bit up there right now.
Is that the minimum number for the program? 640?
Yeah. So
was it 620?
No.
Okay.
No. So in the Hometown Heroes program, where the state's setting that rate, maybe their FHA rate is 7.25 today, as an example. Okay. If I were a 640 credit score getting an FHA loan with no Hometown Heroes, my rate could easily conceivably be 7.6 and maybe even have a cost associated with it. That's just what market is right now.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question, in that scenario of that buyer, I'm getting a better deal because I'm getting a 7.25 rate. My rate would have been higher without Hometown Heroes. There are no points. There is no cost for that rate. So now my rate is free. I'm exempt from having to pay that intangible tax at closing because I'm using that the down payment assistance program. So you get all these perks, okay? That rate is going to be the same rate whether your credit score is 800 or whether your credit score is 640. So you need that 640 to get in there, and if you are on the lower end or in the mid 600s, you probably are getting a better interest rate than what retail market would give you, okay?
Which is interesting, isn't it? The tides have changed on that.
Yeah. And so there have been many times in the past, and it's just we're in a wonky market right now with everything going on. There have been times in the past where the Hometown Heroes rate has hands down beat a bond rate through Florida Housing, has hands down beat what the retail market was doing. They don't go through multiple price changes a day like the regular market does. Their rate is set once per day, and that's the rate that we sell for that day. So
there's some people listening to this right now that are in complete shock that the rate is 7 anything.
Yeah, no, and
but these are normal rates.
They are, and I'm not saying that I'm not. We're not writing USDA loans that are in the 6s. We are. It's just, what is the credit score? What is the down payment, if any? Do you need the assistance? What box do we fit it in? And then we go from there.
Do you remember the shock factor when the rates started hiking from like that 3-4%?
Yeah.
And they were like in the 5s. The more you guys were dead for a minute.
It was sticker shock for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie.
And now people are like, man, I wish I was telling people at the time, I was like, listen, yes, the rate's not 3 or 4% anymore, but you need to buy a house. You want to buy a house, right? You have to buy it based on your circumstances. And you don't want to not buy a house because of the rate. You want to buy a house you can afford whatever the rate is.
Right.
Because the last thing you want to do is sit back and now the rates are in the 7s and go, man, I didn't buy when they were in the 5s. I should have bought when they were in the 5s.
So it's the old nuance of, and it's just everybody has a different mentality about it. We have these fabulous pre-qualified buyers that are just sitting on the side of the pool. We're going to wait for rates to come down. Okay. Well, guess what happens when rates come down?
Yeah.
Everybody jumps in the pool. Yep. And when everybody jumps in the pool, guess what happens to property prices?
Yeah, you're competing with multiple offers. You're going to have to bid up on price.
You're bidding up on price. So I mean, the joke, the funny thing to say is marry the house and date the rate.
Yeah.
As soon as the market corrects itself, we're absolutely going to hop in and do a streamlined rate reduction loan for you and get it down to.
It'll be easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Yeah. So with regards to the Hometown Heroes and how it actually works, we facilitate it in-house as the lender. You're not going to 2 different entities and applying for 2 different loans. We handle all of the documentation. Our underwriters certify those loans. And what you're doing is you're agreeing to a silent second mortgage, a silent second lien on your property. And so in the Hometown Heroes program, you're going to get 5% of your loan amount up to $35,000 with a minimum amount of $10,000. So if maybe I'm using Hometown Heroes and my property is only $175,000 and 5% is not quite $10,000, you're still getting $10,000. Okay. So we when you sign up for that sort of down payment assistance, it's at 0% interest. You have no payment. You pay no interest. It is literally just a silent second mortgage. So you're using this money for free. And so the for free is until. And so what is the until? Well, the until is if you sell it.
Or refinance it, right?
Yeah, I'm going to break it down for you. So if you sell it, just like anybody else's second mortgage, they're going to expect to be paid back. Let's say rates get better and you call and say, hey, I can get down to 5. Let's do a rate reduction loan. We're going to pay that off in the refi. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to lower the interest rate. You cease to occupy it. This program is designed to help first-time homebuyers.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
Achieve their primary home. Okay, that's what it's intended for. It's not intended for investors. So you buy it and say, oh, thanks for that Band-Aid. I'm going to move out and rent it out 6 months later. they will call the note and expect to be repaid at that point.
How do they see that? How do they know?
I mean,
is it the tax bill?
You move your homestead.
Oh,
there are ways for them to figure it out. It's just not designed for investors.
Right.
It's a good deal for people that have been working really hard to get into their first primary home.
yeah, and it's a great program.
So it's great. I mean, it's again, you're using their money at 0% for nothing, and it's a wonderful program to help people facilitate that.
If you're thinking about buying, you're trying to figure out how to start, where to start, what you need, how to begin, if your credit score is good enough, if you have enough money to get in, what down payment assistance programs are available out there to you that you qualify for, or any of that stuff, we can help. Yep. Our off-air number is 813-377-2775. Again, 813-377-2775. For those of you watching on the live stream, you may notice we no longer have commercial breaks because we're doing the podcast first, and then it's going to the station to air at that point, not live. But this is Tampa Home Talk. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell. Big thank you to Sarah Crickey with the mortgage firm, official show partner of Tampa Home Talk, and they've made it possible for our show today. Remember, love where you live, or we're going to fix it. Welcome home.